Welcome, everybody, to the Contextual Christian Church Bible Study, where today we will be getting into chapter 23, finishing it out, which would be verses 4 to 18. Again, that's all of chapter 23 we're finishing out, and it's from verses 4 to 18. And I'll go ahead and pray us in. Everybody bow your heads. Father, thank you for this time you've given us to be able to study your word. Thank you for the fact that Charles is on. I pray that whatever Thomas is going through, that if it's something of a self-preventable problem, then I pray this be his wake-up call to never make that mistake again. There is a difference between preventable issues and non-preventable. But if there is something worse that has happened or something that's actually outside of his control, then I pray, God, that whatever it is, that it works out to your will and that everybody is okay. And as we go into our list, our reading portion for today, I pray to gain more of an understanding, not just of what we read, as we did see, but of how it impacts to our lives personally and be able to be relatable to us individually. In your Son's holy and precious name, Jesus Christ Yeshua. Amen. All right. So, last time what we had gotten into, we finished up chapter 22, starting from verse 15, and we got into verse 3 of chapter 23. So as we went into it, there was a couple things that we had to point out. For one, we had it pointed out where this area that they were talking about in 22, they're sitting here living it up with the idea in their head that they're going to die real soon. As it pointed out, that like they're dying as if they're going to die tomorrow. So instead of going to God and turning to him and doing right by him, they just go to live it up and party it up. So in response to that, what God does, as first of all, pointing out that their punishment is their sin is not going to be purged away from them, it's not going to be gone from them to the day of their deaths. But as part of their punishment, he points out that they're going to be carried away to captivity and that they're going to be violently turned and tossed. In other words, it's not going to go well for them and they're not going to be able to live it up. And then, as well as we got into in the final portion of chapter 20, we literally saw the connection of chapter 22 in verses 20. We saw the connection that God was making between the burden of those people all the way to connecting to Christ. And we saw the correlation there of the New Testament. We saw the connection of the key of the house of David, which is also something brought up with Peter and being able to loose things or tight things up. We saw about Jesus being fastened as a nail and how when that nail is brought down in verse 25, in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, shall the nail that is fastened to the sure place be removed and be cut down and fall. And the burden that was upon shall be cut off, for the Lord has spoken it. Literally bringing up a comparison of showing how when Jesus got off the cross being buried, that he brought down the burden of sin and the law with him. One other thing I want to bring out is in verse 14, how it pointed out that they will hang upon him all the glory of his father's house, the offspring and the issue. Offspring and the issue is the cast out, literally bringing up those that are part of his offspring and those that are not, as we see from Jews and Gentiles today and from Jesus's time. Then we got into chapter 3. And in chapter 3, we started going into the burden that Tyre was going to have to deal with. Tyre, Tyrus, same place. And it didn't only start off with going into punishment. The first thing that we actually read about was about the ships that Tarshish, ships of Tarshish, they were going to be destroyed. They were going to have problems. But in the second and third verse, we got into the ones who were living in the isles or the islands. Those ones who had the merchants of Zidon, they were going to be replenished. They were going to be perfectly fine. So it wasn't all a punishment as listed, but we did start to read about their burden. And that's where we're going to continue from today. Now, since I'm going to be the only one reading today, I'll go ahead and switch it over to our first section. But keep that in mind, that's where we're at the moment. All right. Now I'll be getting into chapter 23 of Isaiah, verses 4 to 8. Now I'll give everybody a second. All right. Verse 4. Be thou ashamed, O Zidon, for the sea hath spoken, even the strength of the sea, saying, I travail not, nor bring forth children, neither do I nourish up young men, nor bring up virgins. As at the report concerning Egypt, so shall they be sorely pained at the report of Tyre. Pass ye over to Tarshish, howl ye inhabitants of the isle. Is this your joyous city, whose antiquity is of ancient days? Her own feet shall carry her afar off to sojourn. Who hath taken this counsel against Tyre, the crowning city, whose merchants are princes, whose traffickers are the honorable of the earth? All right. So, as we said before, with the summary, and I got to bring this up, we literally didn't have it looking like a punishment entirely for the second and third verse. However, going back to it, it said, Be thou ashamed, O Zidon. Well, who was the group that Zidon was part of? Was that part of Tyre that was having the issues, or was that part of the other merchants? Well, as we go back into it, in verse 2 and 3, in verse 2, be still, ye inhabitants of the isle, thou whom the merchants of Zidon that pass over the sea have replenished. So, in other words, that's the one that seemed like it was going well for them. So at first he told him to be still, but then it brought up how everything was going good for them. Now it brings up to be ashamed, giving us a little bit more context in relation to them. When it said be still, there was a couple ways you could look at that. The more likely at the time, based on what we had read, would be relax. But not relax as in necessarily enjoy, though that was the more likely. It just meant relax, like calm down, be where you are. And now we see from 4, we see why. Now, first off, as I've had for our people of the church to practice, I'm going to tell you the sections before I continue on. But I wanted to make sure we had that connection first. So, the amount of sections that we have in here. First of all, 4 and 5. Hold on one second. All right, back to it. Sorry about that. So, 4 and 5, they're not connected, but they are. 4 is bringing up for the last section. It is connected to that. But 5 is connecting that to what was told in the burden of Egypt that we read about and what they were going to go through. But we could look at that as separate sections or like singular sections. Even though they are connected, they're in different details. And then we have in 6, continuing from 4. So 5 is a little side note in there. So technically from that, we have 3 sections. We got verse 4, which connects to the last part, which is also its own standalone here, which is bringing up about stop acting like you got everything good, like you're all right. The sea is not sitting here acting like it's bringing up kids. Not like it's sitting here trying to nourish, like it's going to give you up everything you need. You better be paying attention. So just because you have something going good, don't get high and mighty. That's the warning going through 4. But then when we get to 5, we have a little standalone verse that is connecting this situation to the situation or under the section that said the burden of Egypt. And then lastly, we have going back to Tarshish in our explanation from verse 6 to 8. So that's the sections. Calling out Tarshish after bringing up, even though you got everything going good, the people of Zidon in the Isles, don't sit here and get stuck high and mighty, because it's not the sea bringing up, trying to nourish you and everything. It's not really going like that. So that's a word of warning to them. Now, as towards the actual explanation, going into 4, that's what we have there. It brings up about not travailing. Now, I need to explain travail. Travail is it's being in labor when giving birth. So right before the baby comes out, when the mom is in pain and dealing with the labor pains, that's what travailing is. So it's using the imagery of giving birth, bringing them up to children, and nourishing them up to young men, all parts of life, nor bringing up virgins. So it's bringing up every form of growth of life to explain that the strength of the sea is, I'm not here for your sustenance. I'm not here to raise you up. I may be a benefit to you, but I am not here for you. You getting benefited from me is a side note, is what's being explained in 4. So this is really a word of warning to them. Make sure you don't get arrogant, because I'm not made for you. So then we have in verse 5, it points out that this is the same point as the rivers of Egypt and all the waters and all the sustenance of Egypt. Yes, Egypt may have been benefited by it, but it wasn't made for Egypt. And this is something that we have to understand in our own lives. Yes, you may have a job. You may have finances. You might even be rich. Or you may just have 3 square meals a day. Or maybe not even that much. But all the work, everything that you have, it was not made for you specifically. So never get to the point that you are high and mighty, prideful, to where you can't understand that everything that God has, it's for his will, including you. And as we've seen from even other verses, that includes the wicked vessels as well. That includes the people that live in sin as well. And not just the people. There was a time where God needed somebody to be deceived. And he asked up who would be willing to do the deception and do the lie. And so one of the angel or one of the spirits there, they were willing to do the lie. So even the wicked spirits, even the sinful spirits, have a purpose for God's will. Because God is not a man that he should lie, nor the man that he should repent. He's not just a man. Even when he's Jesus, he is both man and God equally, God in the flesh. And so, when we point that out, we have to see that difference. We have to see that difference in our own lives with everything that we have, including your own children. Your child is not yours. It is the blessing that God has given for you to take care of. But that is God's child. And if you do wrong, leading that child astray, you better be worried about what that means towards you. Because God gave them to you to be able to work with. And then lastly, in verses 6 to 8, pointing out, pass over to Tarshish, howl, ye inhabitants of the isle. So go over to Tarshish. You better be freaking out just as much as they are. Is this your joyous city? Is your city really doing that well off? That has all this history? That's a sarcastic thing. Is this your joyous city? Whose antiquity is of ancient days? So you think you're cool because you got some time under your belt? Gotta love how that relevancy goes to people of age. You think just because you're old, you're wise? You think just because you're older, you know more? There is a pride in age, and that is not wisdom. Just as much as there is pride in novelty, but that does not mean knowledge. Just because you're young and something is new does not make it right. And just because you're old does not mean it's wisdom. At the last part, who hath taken this counsel against Tyre, the crowning city, whose merchants are princes, whose traffickers are the honorable of the earth? So, from it pointing that out, we get a little depiction. Those that were on the island, those that were on the isle, they had to have been not just enjoying time of the food and stuff they got from the water, but they had to have been poking fun at the struggle or the burden that Tyrus is dealing with, or Tyre, same thing. We know that because it points this out. Who hath taken counsel against Tyre? So, in the midst of calling out the inhabitants of the isle, you're pointing out about them taking counsel against Tyre. You think you're going to be able to come against them just because God is coming against them? Don't think you're special. Yes, they'll have problems. But if you try to come against them just because you think you could get a win in when God is going against them, you're wrong. God doesn't approve of the pile-on. We saw that already before with the children of Israel. When we are reading about Edom and even Ethiopia and Egypt, all the surrounding areas that when the children of Israel are being punished by God, they were trying to take advantage of them. Well, not Ethiopians part, but the general area. They were trying to take advantage and get the spoils that they could get. Edom was doing it. The what was it? Philistines were doing it. And they all were getting called to punishment because of that. So now, does anybody have any comments, questions before we continue on to the second section? Now would be the time to raise your hand. Or if you can't speak, then put a thumbs up if you understood, or a shocked face emoji if you didn't get anything. You didn't get everything. Okay. Go ahead, Charles. You typing it in the chat? There we go. Just verse 7. You typed verse 7? What? What do you mean? Verse 8 is on there. You didn't know where I was getting. Oh, can I explain verse 7? Yes. Okay. So, remember who we're talking to, right? In verse 6, who are we talking to, Charles? No, not Tarshish. Look at what it says in verse 6. In verse 6, it says, pass ye over to Tarshish. Well, if you're passing over to Tarshish, are you Tarshish, Charles? Exactly. So we're not talking to Tarshish. We're telling them to go over to Tarshish. And then it says, howl ye inhabitants of the isle. So we're talking to the inhabitants of the isle. Do you see that? Okay, I need you to respond with yes or no first before you write down. Because you're not able to speak, so I can't. You need to say yes if I ask you a yes or no question. All right. So in 6, we're talking to the inhabitants of the isle. Now, there was a couple things we brought up with the summary and with today's first. So with the summary, we brought up how they were living good. They had the fish and stuff. They were being replenished. Everything was good. And they were told to be still, relax. But then we got to verse 4, and in verse 4, it tells them to be ashamed because the sea is bringing up how it's not here for their nourishment. It's not here to bring up children, giving birth and bringing them up and raising up, even from virgins. It doesn't matter which type of raising up, it's not here for that. Does that make sense? All right. So when it has that, that lets us know that part of the problem that the people of the isle were having is that they're taking for granted what they have. And then when we get into 6, it continues talking to them, as we said, but we get into 7. Is this your joyous city, whose antiquity is of ancient days? Well, what's antiquity? Do you remember what that is, Charles? I need a okay. Got to respond a little faster, please. I know you're writing down, but the yes or no part could come quickly. Antiquity is the stuff you own that's old. So like there's people that go to auctions of antiquities and they'll have some music box from the 1800s or some plate or fine china from the 1700s and like the Antique Roadshow. Do you remember that? Like, does that make sense? Okay. So, in other words, is this your joyous city? Oh, you're sitting here having a good old time, right? Whose antiquity is of ancient days. You have all this stuff that you've owned and been good for the longest time, for a long time. And then it says, her own feet shall carry her far off to sojourn. So all your goodness is going to carry its own self away. Does that make sense? All right. And then in verse 8, who hath taken counsel against Tyre? Now, the reason we're able to understand this is because of the cause and effect process. So, in 6 through 8, we've been talking to the people of the Isle, and we've been discussing the problems they're having because they think they're special. At least that's the way it's phrasing it and showing it. So, in verse 8, when it points out who hath taken counsel against Tyre, that's more like saying, who do you think you are that you could take counsel against Tyre? And then it goes in to point out how amazing Tyre was. It was the crowning city, so almost like a kingdom, who had merchants, were princes. Think about that for a minute. The people who are doing the sales of goods and services are princes, whose traffickers are honorable of the earth. So we're talking about top-notch people. You think you're going to be able to come against them? Now does it make sense how we're able to get from A to B to C and see what God is actually portraying against the people of the Isles here? Does that make sense, Charles? Okay, good. Are you still writing things down? Okay. Let me know when you're done writing as I'll go ahead and switch it. And you could just say done W to let me know when you're done writing down. Oh, well, that was quick. All right, I'll switch it to the second section. Now, before I get into the second section, do you have any other comments or questions before we continue? Put the hand up if you need. Okay, good. Thumbs up. Cool. All right. Now I'll be going into Isaiah chapter 23, verse 9 to 13. And I'll give everybody a second. All right. Verse 9. The Lord of hosts hath proposed it to stain the pride of all glory and to bring into contempt all the honorable of the earth. Pass through thy land as a river, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no more strength. He stretched out his hand over the sea. He shook the kingdoms. The Lord hath given a commandment against the merchant city to destroy the strongholds thereof. And he said, thou shalt no more rejoice, O thou oppressed virgin, daughter of Zidon. Arise, pass over to Chittim, or to Kittim. There also shalt thou have no rest. Behold, the land of the Chaldeans, this people was not, till the Assyrian founded it. For them that dwell in the wilderness, they set up the tower thereof. They raised up the places thereof, and he brought it to ruin. All right. So now again, as towards sections, 9, it's connected to the last section. But it's pointing out, actually, I forgot to do sections. So we got one section for verse 9, obviously connected. The Lord hath proposed it to bring into contempt and all honorable of the earth. Well, what were we talking about in verse 8? We were talking about the people of the Isle thinking they could counsel against Tyre, which is an area of kings where either all the merchants, they're princes. Then we have verse 10 where it's telling them to pass through the land as a river, calling them a daughter of Tarshish. Now, obviously, that's connected to the same thing. However, It's a separate section because we've gone from giving the reasoning for why what's happening is happening to the isle to now giving further instructions of what's going to happen. 11 seems to be doing the same thing, telling of what's going to happen. 12 is still saying the same thing. And then 13, now in 13, it is saying the same thing, but it's not really. Because in 10 through 12, we have a degrading of the people of the isle, a talking down to. However, when we're in this, we're talking about how everything that they have, they're not going to be well off. They're going to be punished in all this. But in 13, it's giving a comparison. The land of the Chaldeans. Now, Charles, do you remember what the land of the Chaldeans is? All right. Land of the Chaldeans is Babylon. That's the Babylonian Empire. So we have the Babylonian Empire, and it points out they didn't even exist as the empire they were until the Assyrians had founded the areas for them to dwell in the wilderness. So it's pointing out and comparing 2:12, but it's giving a whole separate section to show it out. So though it is technically connected to 12, it's not completely connected. So this could go either way. This can either be looked at as two sections, with verse 9 being 1 and 10 through 13 being 2, or you could look at this as three sections. Verse 9 being 1, verse 10 to 12 being 2, and verse 13 being the third section. Now, for the sake of explanation, and in this situation, I would more likely put it as 2 because in 12, it brings up the oppressed virgin. So it brings up like the daughter of Zion. So in other words, you didn't build all this yourself. And then in verse 13, it brings up the Chaldeans not being able to raise up until Assyrian is founded. So we got the same concept showing through those two. That's why I would lean more towards two sections rather than three sections here. Does that make sense, Charles? All right. Now, as towards verse 9, now as we saw from the reading before, we got the gist generally that the people of the isle were being prideful and being told to stop it as the warning, but not necessarily a warning, but it's more like a after effect. Like you should have been still. If you would have been honorable and not prideful, you would have been fine. This is all happening, as pointing out in 9, to stain the pride of all glory. God doesn't want anybody having glory in themselves, so to speak. He wants people to have glory in him. The pride, the arrogancy to think that you have anything established in your life solely because of you. That is crazy wild. And when we think about our own lives, it is crazy wild. Yes, you play a part, but you don't control everything. There is so much outside of your control that if it doesn't happen exactly how it happens, you are not where you are. And we need to keep that in mind as a lesson for our personal lives. Even as you go to build a better life, never forget the gratefulness. Because if things don't pan out in God's will for that to take place, you could get hit by a car today. Drunk driver. You could lose your family. You could have all your money stolen through somebody hacking bank accounts. It has happened a few times before. And so never forget that God has the last word and God has the last effort. Then pointing out for them as a daughter of Tarshish. They came forth from Tarshish. Go ahead and pass on the land through as like a river's passing through. Rush on through. You ain't got no more strength. And then pointing out about how God is the one shaking the kingdoms. And he has given commandment against the merchant city. Now remember, when we look at something that's against, there's two ways to look at that. Against can either meaning facing, or as in like looking at, or can mean facing as in an enemy. If I'm against a wall, I'm facing the wall. But if I'm against you, I'm an enemy of you. And so when it points us out as God has given commandment against the merchant city, that means that it's to destroy them. So even before it says the words to destroy the strongholds thereof, we can already know that that's basically where it's leaning towards. It's just a blessing, the fact that it says those words exactly. But that's what it generally means. And then as we go into 12, so now that we've brought up about the merchant city, their strongholds are going to be destroyed, it's like points out, and he said, thou shalt no more rejoice, O thou oppressed virgin. Don't sit here and be enjoying the fact that Tarshish is getting screwed up. Just because they oppressed you, that don't mean that you get to benefit off of their destruction. Yeah, they may have been oppressing you, but they were even more honorable, as the way it basically described. And then it points out that even as you're laughing at their painfulness, you're laughing at their punishment, you're going to pass over to Kittim. And when you're there, you're not going to have any rest either. So even as you run away to try to get rest, you're still not going to get any rest. And then it gives the example to compare. The land of the Chaldeans, Babylonian Empire. The empire didn't exist until the Assyrians had founded the areas for them to dwell in the wilderness. They were able to raise up the places and bring it to ruin because there was already an establishment to take over. Little by little building till they had enough strength to do bigger things. And that's what we're getting from verse 13, comparing to 12, comparing to the isle. So now, does anybody have any comments or questions about the second section, as we're going to go to the last section for today? Now would be the time to raise your hands. All right, Charles, good to go? Good. All right. Then I'll go ahead and I'll be reading Isaiah chapter 23, verse 14 to 18. We'll be finishing up the chapter here. So I'll give everybody a second. All right. Verse 14. Howl, ye ships of Tarshish, for your strength is laid to waste. And it shall come to pass in that day that Tyre shall be forgotten 70 years, according to the days of one king. After the end of 70 years shall Tyre sing as an harlot. Take in harp, go about the city, thou harlot, that hast been forgotten. Make sweet melody, sing many songs, that thou mayest be remembered. And it shall come to pass after the end of 70 years that the Lord will visit Tyre, and she shall turn to her hire, and shall commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. Wild. And her merchandise and her hire shall be holiness to the Lord. It shall not be treasured nor laid up, for her merchandise shall be for them that dwell before the Lord to eat sufficiently, and for durable clothing. All right. This one is an interesting one. Now, first and foremost, as we're going through all this, 14 is not connected to the previous verses, but 15 is definitely connected to it. But it's a different section. In 14, we have a separate section because it's pointing out that all the strength they have is laid to waste. Now, we could technically connect this all and say it's all in the timeline, but it's pointing out very specific, important parts to it. In 15, we're bringing up the captivity and the exile of the children of Israel. That just like them, and not bringing them up, but something similar to theirs. Tyre is going to be gone for 70 years. That's the same time frame as the children of Israel is. And Tyre is near their land. So we're talking about the same time frame when we look at the context, especially after bringing up the Chaldeans, the Babylon Empire. And then in verse 16, it's continuing from 15 with the singing as a harlot taking a harp. 17 is bringing it up as well after the end of the 70 years. And then 18 is connected to 17 about the fornication. And how she's giving it out to whoever, to everyone of the whole world, comparing Tyre to a prostitute. So now as we're going through it, we see that this is two sections. 14, which is a standalone verse, everything that they have is going to be laid to waste. It's going to be trashed. And so now in verse 15, we'll go into the explanation for that. And it'll come to pass in that day that Tyre shall be forgotten 70 years. Just like how the children of Israel went to exile for 70 years, Tyre is going to be forgotten for 70 years. And they're according to the days of one king. Well, what's that one king? Ah, yeah. When the Babylonian Empire takes over the whole region. And after the end of 70 years, so when the land of Israel is coming back from exile, when they're being returned from all their places, that's when Tyre is going to be singing like a harlot, like a prostitute, trying to gain attention because they've been forgotten. So they're so focused on their former glory, they're still not going to get right with God. But rather, they're going to be giving out everything that's supposed to be for the Lord, as in verse 17, everything that's supposed to be for the Lord, the holiness to God, they're committing fornication with all the kingdoms of the world. Going into 18, pointing out about what they are giving out their merchandise, what they're being paid for, is the holiness of the Lord. So all the things that are supposed to be holy and unto God, holy, Holy, sanctified, they're going to be giving out those things to the entire world. And when they do this, ironically, even though it's them just giving it out to whoever, which is them doing wrong, it's going to work to the benefit of God's people. Even though it's not going to be treasured, it's not going to be held up, it's going to be given out for the whole world, but it's going to be for the sake of the people that do live before God to be able to be taken care of, to eat sufficiently, to have clothes that are durable, that will stick through. So ironically, Tarshish giving out the holiness of God falsely is going to lead to the benefit of those who actually follow God. All right. Does that make sense, Charles? Any other comments or questions? All right. Now, is there any more comments or questions of the whole Bible study portion before we pray out the Bible study portion? Now would be the time to raise your hands. All right, Charles is good. So then I'll go ahead and pray us out. Everybody bow your heads. Father, thank you for this time you've given us to be able to read your word. Thank you for this understanding of not just the punishment and the burden that Tyre was going to have to deal with, but even the isle that originally came from Tyre. There was a branch off that thought they were special because Tyre's going to be the one going through it. And it goes to show that even when it's not dealing with the people of your people, even when it's dealing with people of the world, you still have a semblance of fairness. You still have a semblance of like, just because they're going through it doesn't mean you get to tear them down even further, jumping on their back to push them down further into the mud. And we're grateful for that, God. And we know that your protection and your guarantee is not necessarily for us to have a peaceful life, but that we would have a peace in the eternal life. But even still, you did come to give us life and life more abundantly. Life being eternal salvation, life more abundantly being in this life with you. And so we praise you and we give thanks for all of this. In your son's name, Yeshua. Amen. All right. Now on to the Bible listening portion. Tonight's Bible listening is from 2 Kings chapter 23 to 1 Chronicles chapter 8. Again, that's 2 Kings chapter 23 to 1 Chronicles chapter 8. And let me know when you got it. All right. Now, I had Charles point out what stuck out to him since it's just me and Charles today. So that way I can go ahead and bring it up verbally so the listeners can hear it. So, what stuck out to Charles, there's it. There we go. 2 Kings. Oh, wait, let me say what it was. So, last night's Bible listening was 2 Kings chapter 12 to 22. Again, that's 2 Kings chapter 12 to 22. And what stood out for Charles was actually in verse 18. And in verse 18, it was in chapter 18, verses 19 to 25. In chapter 18, verses 19 to 25, we have where Rabshakeh is completely disrespecting God and just going ham. At one point, bringing up, what do you think your God's going to be able to do anything against me? Have you not seen how I've been able to destroy these other nations and their gods did nothing? You think yours is going to deliver me into your hands? Ironically, after the fact, he did. But it goes to show how, with people of the world, just because you think everything's been going good, don't get high and mighty. God could bring you lowly at any time if he so desires. It's not just the people of God that are in God's control. It's also the people out. And so when Rabshakeh was doing that, telling them not to trust in God, it also is something to be taken for that. Don't think, and if you're not of God, if you haven't been obeyed the gospel, baptized properly and everything, proper understanding the whole nine, don't think that if your life's been going well, that, oh, well, yeah, I'm not worried about your God because look at how good my life's going. You have no idea how bad God could turn it around in a negative way. You have no idea how much everything you build when you pass on could come to nothing, or God could set it up where it ends up in the hands of his people. You don't know where it's going to go. So just because things have been working out as of recent or throughout your life, don't assume that that means something special for you. But that's what stuck out to Charles was about him always. It always stands out to him. He said because of how disrespectful that guy was towards God and Hezekiah. And the other part was something I added of why that sticks out to me. Now, as for mine, what stuck out to me is in 2 Kings chapter 14 in verses 5 and 6. And in 2 Kings 14, verse 5 and 6, and let me get back to it. I'm going to read it for you guys. All right. Oh, not chapter 5, chapter 14. And it came to pass, as soon as the kingdom was confirmed in his hand, that he slew his servants, which had slain the king his father. But the children of the murderers he slew not, according to that which was written in the book of the law of Moses, wherein the Lord commanded, saying, the fathers shall not be put to death for the children, nor the children be put to the death for the fathers, but every man shall be put to death for his own sin. Now, this sticks out to me for a couple reasons. For one, as it pointed out, that was a commandment of God that the children don't get killed for what the parents do, nor the parents for what the kids do. You are responsible for your sin, no one else. And the fact that even in the midst of taking out the ones that went and killed his own dad, the king prior, it just goes to show when somebody's standing on God's word, they stand on business, they're doing it that way. Now, there's another part as to why that stands out to me. How can Catholics and other fake or false forms of Christianity, Protestants included too in some, depending on which version, how can they ever claim that you are born with sin? How? When it even points out word for word that by God's commandment, the father is only killed for what he does. The child is only killed for what they do. How could you say you're born a sinner? Not born with a sinful nature, but born already having sin, needing to be saved from birth. There's two reasons why that should never be the case, that somebody thinks that false doctrine is true. One is this right here. We have so many verses that prove that a person is accountable to what they choose to do. And even if somebody did sin, if we see, as we see in the Bible in many places, that they're not even accountable until they could understand right from wrong, as with Adam and Eve, as with everyone under 20 years and younger in the when they were wandering through the wilderness. So even if you did sin, you were not accountable to it until you had an ability to understand right from wrong. So the fact that you get all these false religions that claim they believe and follow in Christ, but yet then they say that they believe you're born with sin, you don't believe and follow Christ because you don't follow what his word says. You believe that Jesus is God in the flesh. You think he doesn't know this verse? All he ever did when he was correcting the Pharisees and Sadducees was point out and say, have you not heard? Have you not seen? Have you not read? Every time, if he was willing to correct them that way. That's what he would do. So when we look at it from that perspective, it should never have been an option because it's all over the place in the Bible, Old Testament and New. You are accountable to what you do. Jesus said himself, even when he was talking to the Pharisees, saying, this is his words, almost quoted exactly. And you can go to the verse by looking it up, where he points out, he says that if ye had been blind, ye should have no sin. But because you say you have, because you say you can see, because you say you're not blind, your sin remains. So even in the New Testament teaching, before he passed on, he literally said that if you were unable to see, you would not be dead in sins. You would not be accountable to sins. But at the moment you are capable of understanding, the moment you're able to see, your sin remains. It stays. So those two reasons, that's why that sticks out to me. Now, Charles, do you have anything you want to add or say about that verse? All right. And do you have anything you want to add or say about the rest of the anything else before we close it out? All right. Then I'll go ahead and close us out. Everybody have a good night.